This is one of my favorite quotes, and it comes to us from a fellow named Bob Conlon. Bob was the first CEO at Navex. He's recently been reappointed to this role, and it is a speak up culture exists only when it is paired with a true listen up culture. And Bob was really one of the first to say this publicly in the compliance world. So I always cite to him for this, and it seems to sum up pretty much what you said, Sam.
Wow, I would have to say Bob's a pretty smart guy.
He went to the University of Michigan.
There you go. Go blue.
Go
Yeah,
Blue.
no, that's exactly what I was saying. And I think it holds water. And so the question as a leader, because leaders are going to be leaders that are either listening live or leaders that are going to be watching the replay. My question to you is, what are you doing to proactively listen up? What steps are you taking to get closer to your people, to create those channels of communication? Just saying you have an open door policy doesn't cut it. Everyone says that, but not everyone even means it.
Sam, we just had a comment come in from one of our listeners, which suggests you need a listening strategy. Is that something that you've advocated, you agree with, or what might be your thoughts on having a real strategy around listening?
There's two things, and one goes back to the suggestion box that I mentioned. Listening means having a system in place that handles all those suggestions that come in on a timely basis. They get evaluated. They if they should be implemented, they are put on a schedule to get implemented. That's reacting to people sharing. That's listening. But the other is what I already mentioned, and that is, what's your plan for getting out and touching people, connecting in a relationship? Because when you build relationship, you build communication, you build accountability, and that's where true listening is going to happen. I totally agree with Ernie, and I think it's not just about what comes to you, but I think what's your plan for getting out? And there are leaders that just make a point of, in the morning, they spend a certain amount of time on the production floor, or they travel around to a certain number of their locations, or whatever it is. But I know one CEO that when he took on an executive assistant just so he could offload responsibilities, so he could have more time to just spend with the people. He just wanted to be with his people. That is an active listening strategy.
Sam, I want to turn to some numbers, and we're going to talk a little more detail about the culture audit, what it looks like. And I'm going to try to wrap this around some questions which came from a study released by another organization called LRN over the past week. And the study had some really troubling numbers around the disconnect between what senior management or how senior management sees a company's culture and literally everyone else. And this, I thought, was a great slide to begin to talk about how does the culture audit help you suss out things like, why is there such a wide and maybe even growing disconnect between how senior management sees a company's ethical culture and how everyone else does?
I think a lot of this comes down to perspective. When we do the culture audit, which is our deep dive, data-driven culture evaluation, we measure 15 indices, and it really tells us everything that's going on inside the culture, much of which is not necessarily recognizable on the surface. As an outsider, we see things differently. It's like when you're too close to it, you just don't realize what is or what isn't going on. And quite frankly, senior leadership is driving the culture. So they may think that they're driving it a certain way, but maybe they're not. They're not the ones that are going to realize it. It's all the people that are living the culture that are experiencing what senior leadership is doing, how they're acting based on whatever beliefs are driving those actions. A lot of times we do this culture audit for an organization, and we'll have a leadership team say, we do this with the leadership team, this culture audit. I go, no, we do it with the whole organization. We have to get to the front line because it's backwards facing. It's, how am I being treated? What environment is created for me that I'm participating in and that others are participating in? So if anything, it's almost like a 360, if you will, evaluation of senior leadership, which sometimes they don't like that. But if you're not willing to deal with truth, then, excuse me, I would question what kind of leader you are. So the idea is, I may say something to someone and know what I mean, but that doesn't mean they received it that way. And there's a difference in perception. And that can be the same difference in perception of what's going on in a culture. I can say, Tom, I say stuff to my wife all the time, and I say it in a way that maybe she doesn't appreciate it. And I don't mean it that way. Maybe I'm frustrated with you. And so I'm talking to Renee and I'm telling her, oh, Tom, he blah, 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 blah. And she says, why are you ragging at me? I wasn't ragging at her. I was ragging on you, but I was talking to her. So my message is coming out one way. It's being received another way. It's having unintended consequences. And so my perception of that conversation, that moment, which was great to me and was terrible for her, is two total different things. It's the same way with culture.
So let me take a little bit deeper dive into the numbers we see in front of us, or ask you a more specific question. And it's the number 71% for feel they are listened to and 78% for feel comfortable expressing their opinion. Is that 7% difference a disconnect? And is that something, if not troubling, is it something that should be paid attention to and tried to overcome, remediate, or see if it can be fixed?
It's kind of interesting. Yes, 84% feel they're supported, but only 71% feel they're listened to. I think this calls for deeper conversations and understanding what's going on in the organization. You say, wow, 71% feel they're listened to. That's pretty good. That means 29%. 29% of your organization don't feel they're listened to. I don't think that's a good place to be. So it's numbers like this that give you the real insights. And then you can go, if they feel, more of them feel comfortable expressing their opinion, but they don't feel they're listened to, that means that they're not getting retribution against them for sharing an idea. It's just that idea is not being handled properly. So at 78%, it's still not where I would want to see it. So we need to, when you look at that 71 and 78%, then we're going to sit down with leadership and go, okay, what belief system is driving action? Because action always follows belief. Action, you don't change what you do. You change how you think, what you believe. And if you do that, then what you do will automatically change to line up. So what can we do to help people feel more comfortable expressing their opinion? Number one. Number two, what can we do to help them understand that we're doing something, that we're listening to them, that we're taking action? And so those are two areas that can be, based on this data, those two areas can be attacked pretty quickly and can be addressed. And you can see results in a fast manner if you're serious about wanting to make a difference based on the data.
Okay, this was the next question I went to before, and you really filled it in with the other gaps. So let me ask you, the study that I refer to, the LRN study, Sam, said that typically the higher up you are in an organization, the more you believe the company's culture and ethical decision making are something that's just peachy. And that the flip side of that is further down, you don't see that. How do you, I don't want to say get to management and beat them over the head with the information, but can you present something to management that's data driven so that they understand this is what the data shows. This is not anecdotal. Tom had a suggestion and nobody got back to him. This is real numbers that give you actionable insight, and then you can begin to plan your remediation strategy going forward.
Yeah, it's real simple. Let's go back to the conversation concept that I shared with you. I have a conversation with somebody, I share a message, whatever the message is, the content, how I share it, everything else. The individual on the other side receives that message. Now, what if there was a third party? Every time I had a conversation, I talk with you, I talk with Tara, have a conversation with Ernie, have a conversation with Pam. What if there was a third party every time that came in behind and had three questions that they asked the other party, and they answered those three questions, and that gave me feedback on whether the message was heard, understood, and whether or not they felt that I presented it in a cordial manner, And at the end of a day or the end of a week, that independent third party who's been following me around in every one-on-one conversation I've had gives me a report with data and says, hey, Sam, this week you had 43 conversations, and 2% of the time, the person leaving the conversation left upset. Now, I'm like, I didn't even realize that. They didn't say anything to me. When you have that data, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to change how I speak to people. I have to change how I construct my message. I have to better understand what their needs are. Maybe I need to do a disc evaluation and understand how I like to communicate and better understand how the people in my life like to communicate and be considerate enough to communicate in the words and the manner that's important to them so that they feel more comfortable. I don't know. So am I taking action? Am I doing something with that data? I don't think that we always realize what's happening around us. And so as leaders of an organization, finding out how your people see what's going on and then looking at that and not trying to defend your actions, not trying to defend it, but trying to understand why the people feel the way they do. And then how do you take steps to create a more powerful relationship, more powerful communication, more powerful culture, and then go about implementing that. And so that's how I see that.
Let me turn now to, and I'm going to use a phrase that you perhaps said is as not articulate as you might want to use, but I'm going to say middle management.
And I'm sticking with middle leadership, but go on.
Middle leadership. And certainly we have senior management or senior leadership, and then we have workers at the lower level. And in many ways, the middle level is just that, in the middle. They're getting pushback on both sides. How can we and how can the culture audit help those trapped in the middle to both be the first conduit for a true speak up and listen up and still be able to communicate the values of management that they want to communicate about doing business ethically and in compliance and having a great culture at your organization?
Wow. When Tara's on this call, where and people on our team are working with organizations, and we're talking about defining the culture. That's where it always starts. You have to define the culture. You model the culture, you teach the culture, protect the culture, you celebrate the culture. 5 distinct steps, and there's details into each, but you define the culture. You define it through the values. And the number one question that we get asked when we're dealing with mid-level leadership, especially when senior level leadership's not in the room, the number one question, actually on the list of the top 10 questions I get asked, this would be numbers 1 through 10, Tom. The question is, what do I do if my leader isn't living the values? And so that's when that mid-level leader gets in the crunch, because they're trying to get their people to act a certain way, to live a certain set of values, but yet someone above them is not living those values. But their people, the frontline people, they see that, okay? It's not like they don't see it. They go, the big dog isn't doing this. Why should I be doing this? It's no different at home. My brother doesn't have to do that. Why do I have to do that? This just repeats itself all over the place. And so if senior level leaders are living the values, the rules of the sandbox that define the culture, and they're protecting the culture, which means they're making sure that everyone that they can touch are also living the values, then when you cascade down, however many levels it is, to that mid-level leadership, and the reason I say leadership and not management is because you manage things, you lead people. You manage IT, you manage equipment, you manage your money, but you lead people. Leadership is a relationship. It's a way of thinking, not a way of doing. And if the culture is cascading down when it gets to mid-level leadership, they won't have a problem with the people underneath them. They won't feel squeezed because they're being backed up and supported by everyone above them. And when I say backed up and supported, I mean backed up and supported in this is our culture. We're going to live the culture. I'm willing to stand back to back with anyone in a dark alley and fight to protect this culture. And that means that everyone's living those values. And where the problem comes in is never at mid-level leadership. It's when someone above them is not living the values, when someone above them is allowing the number one salesperson to stay, even though they're not living the values because they don't want to lose their number one salesperson. That's when the culture erodes. That's when mid-level leadership gets put in a bind.
Sam, we've had another comment come in from Ernie, and it says leaders have to move from perspective taking to perspective seeking. Why is that seeking? And I'm going to broaden that out to asking questions, to being curious, to wanting to know more. Why is that so important to what you see a leader needs? That just striving to know more about their company, their culture, and their people.
If that's the case, okay, then that striving more is basically a leader says, I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything. You have worth. You have ideas. I can learn from you. And now we have a real relationship going. And so Ernie's right on track. If that's what he's referring to, then that kind of leader is saying, hey, that's one of our 10 commitments of accountability, a commitment to it's all of us, which means that I don't succeed unless you succeed. A lot of leaders are like, you know what? If I'm successful, you're going to be successful. No, it doesn't work that way. If you fail, I fail as a leader. It's only when you succeed that I succeed as a leader. And that is a different way of thinking, which is going to drive a different set of actions, which is going to drive me as a leader to seek perspective, to seek understanding, to seek a different way of seeing things, and then going, you know what? I never thought about that before. I could be better at this. If I have all the answers, if I think I have all the answers, I've already lost.
Let me see if I can move our slides along. So, Sam, I wanted to change the focus a little bit. We've identified a disconnect or stories around a disconnect, what that disconnect may be, called the profile. But I wanted you to maybe talk us through how does the culture audit and the detail it goes into in terms of measurement, how does that help a company to identify things that might be a part of this disconnect so they can begin to manage it or remediate it?
So I got a doctor's appointment tomorrow. I'm going to have my knee looked at. It's hurting. Okay. What are we going to do? We're going to get a cortisone injection, or we're going to do PRP. We're going to replace the knee. Are we going to cut my head off? It's like, what needs to be done here? All right. If you're not going to do an analysis, if you're not going to diagnose what the problem is, how do you know what to do to fix it? And so that's what it's all about. It's about diagnosing what's going on. It's about going in for an annual checkup. I go in for an annual checkup, not because something's hurting, but because if there's something we don't know about, we want to know about it. So you go in for an annual checkup, and what do? They do an EKG, and they go, oh, your heart's great. And they take your blood, and they go, oh, your blood up. You know what? Your blood sugar's a little high. Maybe we need to watch your diet a little bit, or whatever it is. And so the culture audit for us is that annual checkup. It's going in, going through all the analysis, doing the different procedures to get the data, and then go, okay, you're healthy. But even though you're healthy, you could be healthier. So maybe drop a couple of pounds, or maybe come up with a system that allows you to connect with your people a little bit better, or your values are being lived in some areas of the organization, but not all areas. And so we need to be more consistent. So let's come up with a plan on how to have these values live throughout the organization. Because if you value integrity, if you value great communication, if you value ethics, however you want to word it for your organization, and every organization words it different, if that's what you say you value, then we need to be consistent with it throughout the organization. Let's come up with a plan and make that happen.